Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tactica Tuesday. That's right. This is a weird one that we're actually doing live. We do try to avoid them because life gets in the way. We're both dads, so we had to start this one a little over half an hour late, but we hope you still enjoyed it anyways, especially those of you who are watching this in the future, and that means nothing to. So
Yeah.
I'm joined, of course, by Paul, the awesome dude who helps me make this show worth watching. Hey, Paul.
What is happening, sir? I am definitely the Tom to your Vince, perennially making you late for things because apparently my daughter just didn't want to go to sleep tonight. So
That's okay.
Here we are.
It's still relatively early for me, so neither of my kids are asleep. My wife was just kind enough to volunteer to take them so that we could do this.
Yes. Yes. My wife is, I actually had to kind of bail on it and call the audible, and my wife is currently taking care of that. And I just want to take a quick aside to just generally give props to my wife on this whole Warhammer situation. So over this past weekend, we had a family wedding in Virginia that we drove to. So it was like a 10-hour drive. And between the wedding ceremony and the wedding reception, there was like a 3 or 4 hour gap, in which point my wife put up with me taking a detour, going and picking up the General's Handbook from a local hobby store. And then subsequently, I wasn't able to participate in that roundtable discussion that Vince hosted that lasted like 5.5 hours. But my wife, in her saintlyhood, allowed me to listen to that in the car on the ride back.
Damn right.
So I just need to give props to her where they are due. A lot of significant others are in, I don't know. My friends jokingly call them the Warhammer widows, when Warhammer just takes our lives. And she puts up with it fantastically and is awesome. And I couldn't do things like this without her doing that. So anyway, yeah, the General's Handbook 2017 came out, and that's a thing. And the compendium all got updated, and there was a massive new FAQ released. And they were previewing this whole thing with the tagline like, "Oh, game changing again," and we're like, "Oh, that's just marketing. That's they're really pushing that. Oh, it's a new thing. You really need to get this." No, they completely turned the game upside down.
Yep. I remember being really skeptical, and I was like, the game hasn't existed that long. It's not that complicated. Like, you add any new rules, and you're changing the game a significant amount.
Yeah. Like really a significant amount. Like, if you're playing match play, like, the whole game is different now. It's completely different. Just really quick, high level, like, basically you're building all of your armies around the allegiances that have allegiance abilities now, because all of the allegiance abilities are ridiculous, and your Grand Alliance allegiance abilities are hot garbage. So you need to be fielding some sort of ridiculous force to justify that, and there aren't many forces like that out there. So I don't think we're going to be seeing many like Grand Alliance allegiance forces. They totally blew up the compendium. Like, it's just not even really a thing anymore. They stripped all of the keywords that those things, were attached to their, they were like the vestigial tales of all of these factions that continued on, and they just axed all of them. They got all of their keywords taken away. And then they dropped a big FAQ on us that basically totally nerfed the Caradron Overlords. So they are a completely different army now.
Which is all good in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We were originally, last week we almost did a show, and we ended up bailing because life happened. But we were going to do a show on beating KO. But just before that, dropped, like we got the War Scroll leaked that like the Thunderers were getting dramatically changed, and we were like, maybe beating KO is not going to be that hard anymore. And then they FAQ'd a bunch of stuff out to make them even weaker. So, but in the new meta, like I have no idea where anything's going to stand because everything changed so much.
Yeah, we have a radically different game. I mean, almost every faction has been completely changed. Like you said, the old compendium armies are basically not really playable anymore with the other armies that are still being produced. You know, like Bretonia and the Tomb Kings, like they still exist. You can still play them. They still have points. But the problem is that they have had their keywords jumbled around and changed up so much that they're completely insular. There's no cross compatibility anymore. It used to be that, you know, you could bring a couple Tomb Kings units in your Death army or a few regular Death units in your Tomb Kings army, and they could synergize well, and you could, you know, buff them up beyond what was currently available within their faction. It's not the case anymore. They changed everything. Skeletons don't even have like Death Rattle or Skeleton Warriors or anything like that in the name. They changed the names of them and they changed the keywords of them to prevent all of that.
Yeah. Just to like really highlight that point, I went through and checked out like previous to this update, I would say Free People was probably the like most common allegiance keyword on War Scrolls, and it was removed from more than 30 War Scrolls.
Yeah,
like between Bretonia and the Empire, there was a ton of stuff that got War Scrolls completely taken away, and they're now just substitute War Scrolls. We lost battalions. Free People went from this like massive open book of crazy different options to like a handful of units. But as we'll get into in a little bit, like their allegiance ability is just friggin' ridiculous, and like I'm totally cool with that trade-off. I'm pretty happy with that.
They're one of those armies that I look forward to seeing in play because theoretically their ability is incredible. I'd say their faction ability is one of the best, probably top 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, it's. Oh, you're getting quiet on us again.
What?
You were getting quiet on us again.
Oh, my apologies. But in practice, you know, we don't necessarily know how good it will actually be. Like we have to actually look at the math of it and then go test it to see, does it truly stack up to the fear that it inspires in everyone else by just reading through those rules.
Yeah, and also how quickly does Games Workshop drop an FAQ that fixes it? Because it's like rules as written and rules as intended are clearly not the same thing. Like it was clearly intended to be one thing, and they wrote rules in a certain way that allowed for crazy abusive things to be done. And I'm just going to go out there and play it and do battle reports showing how broken it is, and hopefully GW will either confirm or deny that that was their intent.
Right. Yeah, I'm really encouraging players to go out there quick before they get everything fixed and updated, because there are some combos that I wouldn't call broken, but are clearly more powerful than GW necessarily intends them to be. And so run out there, use the app, use every little dirty trick you can to say, hey, this is still legal. This is part of the rules, until they kind of crack down and fix all those little problems. And I'll go into more detail on that whenever we get to my section on Death, but specifically Soul Blight, because I really think that they're the top tier Death army going forward.
Yeah. The other thing that I just want to drop out there, just so that people are aware of it, yes, the War Scroll Builder site in the community page was updated. I have already found errors in the entries in it. So in the meantime, make sure you're actually using your General's Handbook. Those are the official points for things. War Scroll Builder might be wrong, so double check it.
Yeah,
it's still a convenient tool. I'm sure GW is going to get it updated eventually, but they kind of went off a little half-cocked with this one.
Yeah. Do you use Azir? Do you know if that's correct or not? I don't know. I don't use it.
I saw some comments on the post that said Azir is also wrong.
Okay. Well, that's good to know then.
Like, there's units missing. There's points wrong. It's a work in process. At least it's more updatable than a paperback book.
Right. Right.
So, like, high level look at these new allegiance abilities. The number one thing that I noticed among the allegiance abilities that we got in the General's Handbook 2017, as well as the allegiance abilities that are already hanging out there from Battle Tomes, these are very tactically oriented abilities. Like, these are abilities that make you think. They are abilities that give you a big advantage if you are a player that is really familiar with your army, really understands how all the rules work, really knows how to work things tactically on the battlefield to gain the best advantage. And a lot of them will do absolutely nothing if you're a new player and don't really know what you're doing. So in that way, like, I mean, not that I want to say like, oh, let's like screw new players that don't know what they're doing. I am not advocating for that. What I am advocating for is the higher level of tactical adeptness that is being favored with these new rules. That, like, it's less about rolling dice and more about making the right decisions. And I think that's really important. There's not a lot of abilities that are just like a static buff across your army. Like the Dispossessed one is the only one that I can really think of off the top of my head that's just like your whole army just gets this buff. It's a lot more selective. It's a lot more tactical. It makes the movement phase matter a lot more for a lot of armies. So many of these things have to do with special movement, special formation of your armies, location of units, units teleporting around the battlefield or appearing on the battlefield, summoning like the whatever the ability is that the Soul Blight have, that's sort of like summoning, that's kind of like the Stormcast Deep Strike.
Oh, the Nighthaunt have those. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. They can,
yeah.
So long as they have one hero on the battlefield, they can basically deep strike the rest of their army onto the table. Yeah, so long as it's Nighthaunt.
Yeah. The Wood Elves can just like teleport around board edges. All that kind of stuff. Like, it's all so much is movement oriented. The Iron Jaws one is all about picking the right order of activations in the combat phase to potentially get multiple unit activations in a row. It's like stuff that we haven't really had be a factor before is suddenly a factor. Like I one of the abilities that I just love is the Dark Elves ability. I forget what they're called now, but whatever the Dark Elves are, that their units within. What's that? Oh yeah, the Darkling Covens. Yeah, their units within 6 inches of each other of certain types add to each other's model count for purposes of their bonuses oriented around model count. So it just encourages you to like keep tight formations and move things around in a certain way, in a very dark elfy foreboding sort of manner, marching up the battlefield in a tight formation. Yeah, I'm just sort of brain dumping at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say there are two things that I think go along with what you were saying that I found particularly interesting that kind of ties into that. Number one is we kind of have like a third level of customization with a lot of these armies now. Like, we have the command traits, we have the artifacts, and then within the battle traits section for a lot of these different armies, we have another multiple choice option where you can customize your army further within that subfaction. So, for example, Soul Blight has the bloodlines of the vampires, which gives you 4 more options. Right now I actually had the Darkling Covens page open as you were talking about them, and they've got another like 4 or 5 different ones you can pick that are pretty cool. And another aspect of it too, with these new battle traits and all that we're seeing with the sub factions, and just the way that they're kind of being built in terms of the rules, we're seeing a real like 180 in terms of what a lot of these armies can and can't do, and what their true weaknesses are. Because for most of Death, and obviously Soul Blight was a faster army, movement was a bit of a weakness, right? There wasn't much shooting in the army. They weren't really able to move that fast to counter enemy shots. But now Soul Blight's one of the fastest armies in the game.
Right.
If not the fastest, if you're looking at actual movement and not teleportation around the battlefield. You're looking at the elves, the wood elves, and again, it was a relatively slow army. And I'm not saying that they were super slow. I mean, they had their own speedy units, but their infantry and all, they clearly couldn't cross the battlefield as fast as a Stormcast, or if they were run down by cavalry or something, or kind of trapped into a corner, they had their limitations. But that's really been addressed by GW changing this up and allowing them to basically skirt around the board edges, teleport from point to point. Seraphon, again, another army that is not super slow. They have their speeder units, but their basic infantry were not that fast. And now you have a way to play around that by just summoning them into the battlefield, teleporting them in different ways with their frog overlords. And you have ways to address what your faction couldn't do before. And what was a weakness for a lot of these armies is now a strength.
Yeah, I am just like, the thing that I know is going to happen to me, like, one of the players in our local group plays Seraphon, and I know the lists that he runs. I know one of the first things that's going to happen to me in a game against Seraphon is that I am going to get a bunch, like a big unit of Razordons teleported next to me and just fry half my guys.
Right.
Like I see it coming. I know it's coming. Like, that is going to be a thing. Like, teleport and shoot is going to be a major thing that the Seraphon do. Like, yep. I think our call on the Seraphon being like one of the biggest winners out of the General's Handbook 2017 is that was like prophetic, I think, looking at what their actual abilities are.
Yeah. I mean, whenever you looked at them, because I was really looking at this from a perspective of, okay, like, all these new kind of individual faction abilities, right? Like, once we started getting the battle traits for like the Stormcast and things like that, that really changed up the order of these armies. But if we went back and we looked prior to that, the Seraphon were one of the most powerful armies. And so I'm like, okay, well, if they get that kind of unique ability again, right? If they're put on a level playing field in terms of like what they have to choose from with these other armies, then with the Seraphon, it actually won't be a level playing field. They'll be really, really good because they can do just about everything. And that's what we've seen again. I mean, their ability is, in my opinion, one of the best. They have more customization within their faction than almost anybody else. Like, if we pull it up here again on the book, we've got 3 different choices for commanders, and each one of the choices that you choose, whether it's a Slaawn, a Saurus, or a Skink commander, gives you 3 different command traits to choose from. And then you again have their 6 artifacts, and then you have their Lords of Space and Time ability, which is the teleportation one you're talking about, which it's very similar to the Sylvaneth ability. It's not the exact same, but it's very close. And then you have this addition that the Slaawn wizards within the army can unbind from across the battlefield. They have no minimum range. They just have to have line of sight. And if you roll doubles, whenever you're casting, you get to add 6 more inches to the spell. So all of a sudden, the Slaawn, you took an already incredibly powerful magical force, and you just gave them a bunch of other buffs to make their magic even better. So now all of a sudden, you have the anti-Tzeentch force within Order.
Yeah. And the points changes on the Tzeentch units are certainly going to be a hindrance to them. I don't know what those lists are going to look like now, but we're not going to see nearly as many Skyfires on the table, and I think that's a really good thing for everyone except Tzeentch players.
I think it's a really good thing for Tzeentch players. I think the only people it's not a good thing for are the people who, really want to win at any cost, and that's the only way that they really enjoy the game. For anyone, I would say, and I'm not even going to throw all spikes into that category. That's why I don't say, well, that's just bad for Spike. But, for anyone who's a Timmy or a Johnny psychographic profile, and I'd say a large percentage of the spikes, it's actually a good thing, because suddenly you have more options within your army that are viable, not because they've necessarily been made better, but because you don't have that clear, standout, overpowered choice anymore. So now it's like, okay, now everything else is a little bit more opened up because it's not dwarfed and not walking in the shadow of this greater thing.
Yeah. And a lot of the big abusive strategies got nerfed. Sale had his spell completely changed, so he doesn't give the 18-inch fly move anymore. He just teleports a Slave to Darkness unit, which is still, mind you, a really powerful ability. And I think we're still going to see Sale on the battlefield. He's just going to be used in different ways.
Yep, I would say that in potential circumstances, it's a better ability. Some ways it might not be, but in some situations, it could actually be better.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Dakadez says that he's sad that there's no more flying storm vermin.
Yeah. I am not in any way disappointed that his storm vermin will not be flying at my guns anymore. Yeah, can we just talk about the Skaven real quick? Because I feel like that's worth touching on. That I feel like them getting allegiance abilities for just Pestilence and Skyer really kind of like warps what Skaven lists are actually good, and really is like not that well aligned to what we expect out of a Skaven force.
You want to go further into what you mean by that?
Say that again?
You want to go further into what you mean by that?
Yeah, like, in particular, like, I would have thought that they would be giving allegiance abilities to, like, Clan Verminous, right? Because that's where your Storm Vermin are, that's where your Clan Rats are, that's where, like, the bulk of your bodies, your main troops are in that faction. And I would have thought that they would have gone more down that line. Maybe that means we're getting a Skaven book at some point soonish. Or going more down. Oh, my dog's going crazy. Sorry about that.
She doesn't like the idea of Skaven coming to the forefront more.
Yes.
You've upset
her. So I think what would have been interesting is if they did something more along the lines of what they did for like the Seraphon or for Tzeentch or for Khorne, where they had, okay, here is a generic Skaven ability, right? And now if your general is Skyer, you get these abilities. If your general is Pestilence, you get these abilities. If your general is Verminous, you get these abilities. I think that would have made a little bit more sense. I don't know in the fluff necessarily if that is how it's going to work out, but I feel like a lot of Skaven lists that people were running now basically just don't work. And I mean, they still work. Like that, we have to kind of like put a pin on that they still work. You can still play them. You're just getting the really super crappy chaos allegiance abilities if you're going with a mixed Skaven force.
Right. And it really seems kind of weird too that, and they're not the only instance of this, but they are one of the factions that we can really easily point to, and they're kind of counter to the entire movement of AOS. Like, with this General's Handbook 2017, we've seen a very strong push towards larger units, more of the hordes on the table. That's why we have these mass unit discounts. That's why we have some of the new scenarios requiring larger amounts of units to hold points, certain, kind of rules where, this particular squad will trump this squad's value in the right circumstances. We have more of this push towards that, and unfortunately Skaven seem to be one of those armies that already was really good at that. And now the new rules have kind of pulled back to where it's less easy for Skaven players to play the optimal armies in terms of what they have available to them and battle traits and all that kind of stuff, and accomplish that at the same time. I mean, obviously, Allies allows you to play around with that a little bit, but that's definitely a big handicap on armies like them.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of Skaven players were already in General's Handbook 1 running max unit sizes of clan rats and storm vermin and like making Death Stars with the various different abilities that they had available to them. Now, that said, some of those abilities got canned with the compendium update, but
Yep.
So maybe with the compendium update, those strategies would be less competitive. I haven't really looked that closely at the scrolls to really know the answer to that. Maybe some people in the comments can weigh in on that question, but it seems like there's like Skaven not getting a really good treatment in this book. It seems suspicious that maybe we'll get something for Skaven sometime soon. Because like it just seems like if you're going to be running a horde-oriented theme out of the General's Handbook 2017, Skaven are the flagship horde army of Warhammer. They have been for a very long time. And like they're not really encouraging you to use that army in that way.
Right. So, yeah, it's that kind of weird dichotomy of a lot of the horde armies are now more elite, and a lot of the elite armies are more horde-based. I would kind of think that Skaven are going to take a little while before they get a mass update. Like, if you want to talk about Skaven as a collective, you know, we might see a sub-faction like Eshin or something get a bit of an update, or Skyer. I think that, I mean, I know Skyer got the new abilities, but before the General's Handbook 2017, I would have pointed at Skyer and said, this is probably one of the ones that's going to get expanded upon, because GW actually still seems to like them a lot. They tend to engage with them more, put more like tricks out for them. But, you know, what we do know that was hinted at by some of the creators of the game is that if an army didn't get the specific traits and all here, that they are pretty likely to be one of the ones updated not too long. But I would also say that Skaven may not be, because they did just have that box that recently come out with them, the elves. And I know that that's not really much of an update for the high elves or anything, but it almost seems like that because it named a few battalions, as though that's like a kind of halfway update to kind of satiate the players for those factions and kind of hold them off a little bit longer until they actually get their update. So my prediction would be Skaven as a larger entity doesn't get an update for a long time, or in any kind of major way.
Yeah. Also, I'm going to make my own bold prediction there, right along those same lines, since you brought up the that battle box set, whatever that was called.
Like Spire of Dawn or something like that?
Yeah. I'm going to say right now, I think high elves are not getting a new book either. Yeah. I think that I feel like for whatever reason, Games Workshop has decided that those are not the elves that they want, and they're just going to kind of be left on the roadside a little bit.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
I think they're going more the light elves and the new kind of shadow elves, and more along the lines too of what we saw in the Warhammer Quest game, Silver Tower, and then the expansion on that. I think the elves are going in more of that kind of direction, where they're more almost elemental in feeling, as opposed to just high elves, dark elves, and wood elves, which is more of like a classic fantasy trope.
Right. Yeah, and I am still holding out hope that we're going to get a big update to Devoted of Sigmar that will get a book for them and some new units. I don't know if we ever will. I've got 70 flagellants in my basement ready to go for whenever that book does drop. But in the meantime, you know, I'm actually looking at that faction a little bit as for allies. Because the thing that I realized is that Free People basically lost all of their like combat heroes. Like I was using the Bretonnian Lord on a Pegasus as like a really strong combat hero, and you know we kind of lost that role. So the place that we have left to look for free people is in the Devoted of Sigmar, looking at warrior priests, and realizing that their prayers can be done on themselves suddenly makes them look like they might be an attractive option for a more combat-oriented hero for capturing objectives and things like that. Plus, they're like 80 points, so they are no like big investment in your army. They can just kind of get slotted in pretty easily.
And then there's, of course, the awesome model that came in, again, referencing the Silver Tower. That's one of my favorite models from an army that I have no intention of playing, just in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, and I do have him. I don't like his abilities, though. That's I guess sort of a separate discussion. But I like the generic warrior priests better.
Yeah, I just meant that model. Like, I would field him probably as a generic, but use the model of him.
Yeah, and I've got to say too that like converting stuff into Devoted of Sigmar is super fun. Like they have a small model line, but man, can you just like kit bash a bunch of things and make them look super cool. I took some parts off of like a Liberator and made a warrior priest out of him. Like came out pretty cool looking. So
yeah, I think that Devoted to Sigmar army, I mean, of course, has so much room for exploration, especially within the Age of Sigmar, right? And then, from a narrative perspective, like that's really the only human faction we've seen in the books. We've seen a few different little tribes of people that are left over from the realms that, Chaos basically had hunted down and destroyed their civilizations, and these people that the Flagellance box would fit quite well, are basically running for their lives, or the last little bands of basically people living up in caves who have not yet been wiped out. But clearly the Devoted of Sigmar that were in Azir and have kind of fallen in line with the Stormcast, been protected by them, and are now fighting alongside them, you could get very much more of a Bretonnia style, I guess, almost in terms of like the armor, right? You'd have more of like a heavily armored classic medieval knight aesthetic to them, although I don't think that they would go back to the more the French knights that we had with Bretonnia. They would go a different direction.
Yep. And just as, a side note to all of this, this death of the compendium has left me with, a lot of models that are not really usable in Age of Sigmar anymore. And some people would be, really upset and pissing and moaning about that. And I'm just gonna use them for a Kings of War army. Like that's pretty much my plan, is like either sell stuff off or convert it back onto square bases for Kings of War.
Yeah.
One of my friends has been dragging me into ever so slowly, and I mean, if Age of Sigmar didn't exist, I'd probably be full bore into Kings of War. I just like Age of Sigmar better. And I was kind of torn before because I didn't want to invest in an army, and I didn't want to have to deal with like, oh, this army is for Age of Sigmar and it's all on round bases, and then if I want to use it for Kings of War, then I have to have it on squares, and so I have to put stuff on movement trays, and it's awkward. And now I just have a bunch of stuff that I can't really play in Age of Sigmar anymore, so it's just converted over to Kings of War.
At least not within the match play system.
Yes. Or like playing within matched play well.
Yeah. Completely agree. I mean, I don't have as much. I'm obviously a newer player to classic fantasy Warhammer, and Age of Sigmar. I mean, like I started Age of Sigmar like 3 months after it released, but I didn't have Tomb Kings, and came to realize that, hey, those are some really powerful units within Death. So I started converting up models to represent them, and now those models don't really have a home currently. So if there are no new profiles released that they could fit in, I'm probably just going to shelve them and use them every now and again for like a narrative. game or something like that. Maybe if I'm introducing a new player, bring them out for like an open play or something like that. But yeah, not within match play. It's not worth it. I'm going to do more videos. Like I know you've done one already, kind of diving into the free people in the General's Handbook, like what's changed for them. And I know you're going to do more, and I've got several videos planned to do, kind of deep diving into, how death has changed and how you have to play them now. It's not really competitive within a match play system, or at least what doesn't appear to be. So, because obviously we're still in the new meta.
Yeah, and I've got a whole lot of thoughts lined up for videos to do on free people, because our allegiance ability is just ridiculous, right? Like we get to set up our units in groups of 3, and if one of them is engaged in combat and the other 2 units are within 6 inches of it, at the end of our opponent's charge phase, we can charge or shoot.
Yep.
And it was clearly like meant to be a callback to the old detachment rules where you could do like supporting fire in response to charges and all of that stuff. But now it's like, it's so different because we have Age of Sigmar like rules for the thing, and whereas the old detachment rules, like you would have to shoot at the thing that was charging, right? Or you would countercharge the thing that was charging.
Yeah.
Now the rules are so open that it just lets you shoot, period. It's not at a particular thing. It's just shoot as if it was the shooting phase, charge as if it was the charge phase.
Yeah. It's giving me flashbacks to 7th edition POW from 40K, which is a big part of why I stopped playing 40K, and I'm not currently interested in getting back into it. I know the game's completely different. I know it's been Age of Sigmarified and all, and I'm sure I'll eventually get back into the game, but I'm taking a nice long break. I got rid of every model I own for it, and I have no intentions of going back soon because I hate dealing with what's in 40K Overwatch and the Tau's ability to just say, hey, look, you charged my 1 unit, everybody shoot that thing at once. And you're not too far away from that with your free people. So I'm glad there's not a whole lot of free people players locally because, quite frankly, I don't want to deal with that again.
Yeah. And I think in terms of people actually bringing it out in abusive ways, not a lot of players out there really had the models to actually support that kind of abusive play style from 8th edition. 8th edition was very heavy on, you have a big block of like 50 halberdiers, you have big units of knights, which are now out of print and in the compendium, so they're no longer usable at all. A unit or 2 of demigriffs, so people aren't running around with tremendous numbers of demigriffs. I happen to own 12.
I've got 6.
And a unit of 12 might be a thing that I throw on the table at some point.
Do they get a discount for getting larger units?
Oh, God, no.
Okay, I was like, if so, that feels broken.
Yeah, but the caveat on the great companies is that the units have to be at least a unit of 10 models to be included in the great company. So to get demigriffs up to that size, you have to take a dozen of them.
Can they even qualify?
Yes, they can.
Okay. I wasn't sure because it talked about them needing like the specific keyword, and
yeah, the keyword is free people. That's the keyword you're looking for.
It's free guild.
Huh?
Yeah, it says when you form a free guild great company before the battle, it must consist of 1 free guild guard unit with at least 20 models and 2 other free guild units of any type, including other free guild guard units that have at least 10 models. For example, a great company might have 1 unit of 30 free guild guard, 1 unit of 15 free guild crossbowmen, and 1 unit of 10 free guild greatswords.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they're changing War Scrolls to have the free people keyword be free guild.
It's possible. What I assumed just from my first look at it, which even if this does take away the ability of like the demigryphs and a few others to literally only have the ones that say free guild whatever in their name, which is literally the entire sub faction except for demigryphs.
It's
That would
like
still
they
be
knew
pretty
I
good.
wanted to do this.
Right, right. But you still have archers, crossbowmen, guard, and handgunners, and great swords. Which, and the other thing that, like, this sounds terrifying and all, and especially if you're like me and you have experience with Overwatch and 40K, right? This kind of combined Overwatch ability. And that's where I think, like, I don't have much experience with classic Warhammer Fantasy, so that's what I immediately go to. Um, one of the other good limitations of this is that this is only working for the 3 units that are basically paired together in this, supposed triangle, if you will, which is a really good ability, but it's also a nice limiter for it. But I think it's honestly more of a strength than a weakness. And you might say, well, why is that, James? Well, that's because you have the ability to break up your army nice and neatly in these objective-based in these objective-based scenarios to say you 3 units go together, you 3 units go off this other way, and you still have this really well-oiled, cohesive unit that plays off each other really well. And so I think that's actually a positive than just saying your entire army has to do it or can do it for each other, because number one, that's incredibly powerful, perhaps too powerful, and number two, that I like the fact that you kind of have these subunits within subunits within subunits within this army, because that thematically fits what they are, what the free people are.
Yep.
They're a very traditional army in that sense.
I'd also just like to mention that a lot of the lists that I've been kind of brewing up so far with free people are using the Free Guild Regiment Battalion, which previously I had complained about because it was huge. But now you get out of that, you squeeze out of that Free Guild Regiment at least 2 great companies within it. All of your guys get +1 to hit if they're within 6 inches of each other, and everybody ignores battle shock on 1s. If they already ignore battle shock on 1s, they ignore battle shock on 1s and 2s. And this thing is so large, and with the great company abilities, your command traits on your general, I could see Free Guild going to a 1-drop army with this battalion and have everything in your army in this battalion, have 2 massive great companies with your few support units, and you're done. Yeah, I think that's a thing. I think that like a 1-drop gunline list is what you end up with.
Yeah. Which is pretty good. So you get first turn basically automatically, and you're getting that first volley of fire potentially, depending on the scenario and how close you are to each other, which is obviously what they want. And then once you've got that first volley of fire, then once they're charging in, then you continue to just pepper them until the odds are a little bit more in your favor.
Yes. And one of the command traits that you can give to your Free Guild General lets, I think it's all units within 6 inches or 9 inches of him get +1 to save if they didn't charge that turn. And like your Free Guild Guard with sword and shield are already 4-up save re-rolling 1s. So they get +1 to their save on top of that. So they're on 3s re-rolling 1s.
Yep.
And they're like a Mystic Shield up away from a re-rollable 2-up. I mean, that's just bonkers strong.
It is. It's very, very good, especially considering that these are supposed to be just squishy average human.
Yeah. I mean, Free Guild Guard are supposed to be your guys that are really good at dying. And I think they're going to do a lot of not dying. They're not going to die to battle shock because you've got, if you're using that battalion, right, you've got 1, you're ignoring battle shock on 1s and 2s. If you're near your general, you're rolling battle shock on 2d6, take the lowest. And then you have a command trait that's letting your whole army re-roll battle shock tests. I did some napkin math on that. And I did a video earlier this morning. I actually got my math wrong on that. It is almost 90% of the time that you will just auto pass Battle Shock with that combination.
Are you talking about Indomitable? That's the save? That's the save rolls. If they
That's
don't
the save
move.
rolls.
Right.
But the general's banner
just
lets you roll 2d6 and take the lowest for Battle Shock, I think within 24 inches of him. And then we have the general order command trait on top of our already other absurd command battle trait, letting us reroll all of our Battle Shock tests.
Right. But the you don't get the regular order one if you do the Free People's one.
It's an either or? No,
yes.
if you look at the Free People's battle traits, it has both.
I must be misunderstanding you because, like, I understand that you get to reroll Free People's for Free People students in the phase, but I'm just saying is like you get everything that's on this page, but you don't flip over to the order one and get that one too.
Yeah, but there's two under battle traits: Defiant Avengers and Free Guild Great Companies, and Defiant Avengers is the same as the generic order battle trait.
Right, but it only applies to your Free Guild. Like if you take an ally, they don't benefit from it. But yeah.
Meh. You know how many of my allied units are going to be taking Battle Shock tests? 0.
I figured they all would because they'd all just be basically cannon fodder thrown in to die if you ever took any.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of the Free People's allies are going to be single models, unless you take a unit of Flagellants and devote it to Sigmar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really pumped. I'm kind of like a little bit disappointed that we lost so much out of the compendium. Basically, my whole list that I was running not only doesn't work anymore, like it's like not even remotely close to working anymore. Like even with using allies, using some substitute things, like just doesn't fit. So in the whole style of play I was running a heavy cavalry army with artillery support, and that really you basically can't do that anymore with Free Guild. So
right. So given the fact that you've lost so much of your cavalry access, I mean, you still obviously have a couple choices with, in terms of like heroes that have the mounted abilities, and then obviously the demigryphs. I think that's the only cavalry actually within Free Guild. Is that correct?
I mean, sort of. Like Outriders and Pistoliers are on horses too, but they're really not there to be cavalry. They're there to be quick shooting support, and guys to go grab objectives, and guys to go be chaff and baiting charges and all that kind of stupid stuff. Also, this makes me very tempted to buy another group of 5 Outriders so I can field a unit of 10 of them and have them join a great company so that they can take their D3 shots each in supporting fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I was going to ask is, in light of that, the fact that you're more of a ground slogging army now, whether you like it or not, and your abilities, while very powerful, are more defensive oriented, right? And you're going to be fielding hordes, so that's good. So for some of these scenarios, that won't be a problem. But in light of all that, do you think that there's any significant changes to your play style? Are you going to have to start running Pistoliers and Outriders, and maybe you didn't run very many of them before, I don't know, but are you going to have to suddenly take more of them because some of these scenarios require you to be more mobile now, especially considering the way that they've because the 6 new scenarios are not replacing the old ones in the sense that we can still use them, but a lot of them are modified versions of the older ones, and some of them do require more movement because objective points have changed. For example, the new Gift from the Heavens one has 3 different objective points that fall into the battlefield, and What I was just going to ask you is, like, in light of all this, do you see any significant changes on top of having to, go to these kind of triumvirate of units that you're going to have to make to play competitively within the new match play system?
I think unit selection is going to change. I think some of the strategy is going to change a little bit, mainly in terms of what units you're using in what roles. What I was doing a lot before is I was taking the Brotherhood of Knights battalion and taking 2 units of Empire Knights and 2 units of Demigryphs. I would run up the Empire Knights as chaff and then countercharge with the Demigryphs, and use a pair of cannons with an engineer to shoot stuff off the board and have support from a Celestial Hurricanum and 3 units of Free Guild Guard with sword and shield to hold objectives and fill out my battle line. And what else was I running in that? Bretonnian Lord on a Pegasus to be a really good, cheap, effective combat hero. He really did lots and lots of work for me. And I think that's the number one thing that I'm saddest to see go is that particular war scroll, because it was just exactly what I wanted it to be. It was fast. It was mobile. It hit really hard. It was durable. It cost 140 points. It was a cool looking model on the battlefield. And people never friggin' saw it coming because, like, people don't read the Bretonnian War Scrolls. So, right. Like, I would throw an artifact on it to give it extra damage, and it would just go railroad somebody, and they wouldn't know what hit them.
Yeah,
so that's gone now.
Seem to be too fond of him.
Yeah. So that's gone, and that's disappointing. So, and I've always jokingly called my Empire General General Disappointment because he just never does anything valuable in combat. And I'm looking through, what we have for ally options now, and it just doesn't really feel like Free Guild has any really strong, at least by comparison to the Lord on a Pegasus, doesn't have like any strong offensive heroes at all, which is kind of a problem. We might have to dip into some Stormcast to actually get that role filled out.
Yeah, don't you all have like some kind of giant unit like a Griffin or something like that?
Yeah, General on a Griffin, which went down like 40 points, I think, which is pretty awesome, but I think he's still probably a little expensive for that. But the fact that you can throw an artifact on him that gives him +1 to save, so he's this giant, like, 12 wound flying monster that has a 2-up save after that is, well, that's potentially really super good.
Yeah, so, he's only 260 now. Yeah,
he was 300 before.
Yeah, that's pretty cheap. I wish some of my big bads were that cheap.
Yeah. So he might be finding his way into some lists as well. Funny story. The last time I actually brought him out for a game, I dropped him in my garage and did some significant damage to him. So I'm still looking for pieces that flew off. His talons are all broken. So now that he's actually good, I need to repair him and make him
like you should convert him into an undead one now because he's clearly died. And it would fit.
Yeah, I also have a second one that was a converted high elf griffin. Like the high elf prince on griffin or whatever it's called now, probably something totally different than that. But converted him a long time ago, and he's actually not even based. He's just like a model hanging out. So I might just replace with that because he's super cool looking.
Yeah, and that adds some more punch. One thing I was going to say is, like, at first listening to you talk about them and the changes that they've made, one problem that I had encountered for free peoples whenever I fought them was, like in every army, their general is a linchpin to some degree. But with free peoples, it felt like you took out one important hero and everyone was just dead instantly. And again, I've only fought him twice, and I was able to kill the general relatively easy, even though he was behind, his lines of troops, and then his whole army fell apart. But one thing I was going to say is that little triumvirate ability that y'all now have seems to be a little bit of a hedge against that. I'm not saying it's a perfect one. Obviously, you lose a lot by losing your general, especially with free people. But at least that's something separate where your units can still kind of fight with some level of discipline being shown on the battlefield, and kind of band together even in that kind of hard time of losing their commander.
Yeah, and having a battalion that just has static abilities that aren't dependent on any particular model is also really strong. That was what was particularly strong about running the Brotherhood of Knights battalion. It was just a static ability that went on all of the units that were in it. And I think that's really like the hallmark of a good battalion, is one that's not dependent on anything. It's just, you just get this ability, and that's it. Ones that are dependent on like a particular unit in that battalion still being alive, like first thing that's going to happen is that unit's going to get shot off the board. Now your battalion's worthless, and you probably spent 200 points on it now.
One more quick question that again kind of sparked in my mind. You had mentioned that you had kind of built a hypothetical list with two of these basically triumvirates of units within a battalion, so you could do a one drop. Is that something that's playable effectively at a 2,000 point game?
Yep.
Okay.
My other options I'm looking at are something similar that's possibly like 2 to 3 drops, with the drops outside of the battalion that are either like a Luminarch of Heish, an extra warrior priest on a horse for extra hero support, maybe a general on a griffin, those sorts of things. But in general, I mean, I think this is like ripe to be a super low drop army. All the scrolls are pointing in the direction of, this is how you're supposed to play this, and your allegiance ability says this is how you're supposed to play this, and your command traits encourage you to do the same thing. And what's really nice is that between either the command traits and your artifacts, you're pretty much guaranteed to put your general on a 2-up save. Which like really negates that problem of them being the linchpin and being fragile. They're going to be really hard for your opponent to kill at a 2-up.
Or at least harder.
Yeah, harder. And with all of those other buffs flying around, it's not as important to be giving out the hold the line to everybody. It basically, for a lot of units, it basically ends up really just being +1 to wound, because everybody's getting all of these +1 to hits all over the place.
Right.
I mean, you basically have a battlefield full of guys that are hitting on 2s all the time.
Yeah.
I remember actually, I think it was a game against Mitch, where I was playing my free people against, I think it was, he had like some Sylvaneth on the battlefield. They had like the debuffing to hit ability. He's like, okay, so this is like -1 to hit, and that's -1 to hit. And I'm like, okay, this unit's got 20 in it, and it's got a Hurricanum next to it and hold the line, so they're still at +1 to hit. I was like, wait, what?
So many buffs that you're just outdoing the opponent's ability to negate those kinds of things.
Yeah, the free people are going to be very resilient to the hit debuffing that Sylvaneth does. They're a nice little counter to Sylvaneth. There's not too many counters to Sylvaneth.
Seraphon might be too, because they can match them for their jumping around.
Yeah, you're just going to be teleporting giant things around the battlefield on both sides. It's going to be hilarious.
I want to see a game of that. So, as another thought, just before we wrap up Free People, is there any kind of like last bits, I guess, of really important things to note for Free People? It's like this is going to be truly necessary, or this is something that's a design element that you particularly like, and you're going to really play off of in the future game.
I think just really playing directly into everything that the army is encouraging you to do. Previously, I was playing the army with all of the abusive loopholes that you had through the compendium, and I guess I'm not doing that anymore. One thing to note too, for any other Free People players out there, or people that are playing against them, the rule change that we got, or rules clarification maybe, that your command abilities and those sorts of buffs don't apply to mounts. That actually really hurts Free People very badly. Because your Demigryph Knights, they on a 6 or more, the Demigryph's claw attacks do D3 damage. And previously, you would, after the first round of combat, you would throw your general's hold the line ability on them. So now they're doing that on 5s instead, and you can't do that anymore. So their Demigryphs have a lot less punch in the second round of combat than they used to. So that's going to be a problem. Like they went down 20% in points. So I will take that trade-off that they're cheaper. They're also worse. They also don't have a battalion that they fit in really well to anymore. I don't know. I'm probably going to, at some point, field a group of 12 of them in a great company and just see what happens when I can countercharge at 2d6 plus 2
right.
with a unit of 12 of them and basically just swarm my opponent. But anyway, we wanted to talk about some death too.
Because finally, we're getting into the interesting stuff. I'm just kidding. I like learning about Free People because whenever I do get my eventual game in against you, Paul, I want to know everything I can so I can know myself and know my enemy. And that way, as Sun Tzu said, in 1,000 battles, I will never be in danger.
Yep, that means I need to actually start paying attention to talk about death.
Right. So death, much like the Free Peoples, has had a complete to play them. I commented in the show that we did on Vince's channel a few days ago that it was not uncommon. In fact, in my last game I played with Death, I think I had 12 drops, and because we just don't really have battalions available to us outside of the Flesh Eater Courts. And whenever I refer to Death, I am typically excluding Flesh Eater Courts because they are the one sub-faction within Death that's had any real kind of update, again, prior to this book. They've had the one new model released. I guess if you can call it a new model. It's really just like a reimagining of an old kit and just a new unit being created from hybridizing the two. But again, like the rest of Death was very much like you pick a little bit from this sub-faction and that sub-faction, a little bit of Tomb Kings thrown in if you want to up your power level to being truly competitive. And unfortunately, that's not really an option anymore. So, for myself and most of the other people I saw playing Death that were on Facebook or anything else, there was a lot of complaining initially whenever the points for the General's Handbook dropped and we began to see some of the abilities, especially just for General Death, how that had changed and how the Tomb Kings were no longer really an ally that we could bring in. And in fact, we can't even use them with the ally system because they're not allyable, much like your Bretonnians are not, which is a shame. I really think GW, I understand why they're doing it for business perspectives, but I really think that they missed out on a step to make, again, the transition towards retiring these armies fully that much easier. This is a much more sudden jump after we'd seen them do so much with the first General's Handbook to make those armies competitive to some level and easily playable and to really mesh well within their kind of larger sub-factions. Before that being said,
I think the real fumble with that was not that not that they're not making them compatible, it's that they waited so long to make them not compatible.
Right, that's what I mean, because we've had such a strong shift. We had them go from bending over backwards to make them compatible to a 180-degree turn in which they are not. If they had just begun Age of Sigmar or even the match play system with saying these are no longer compatible within the competitive match play scene, then fair game. We're not used to it. It's like, okay, it's a natural transition, but this feels like a very much more forced and sudden thing. And I think that's why a lot of players like you and me who use these kinds of units are more upset about it, at least at first, because it's completely, ripping apart the way that we played. And it had been established for a year of us doing this.
I mean, over a year, like 2 years doing that. I mean, as soon as Age of Sigmar got released and I saw that the Bretonnian War Scrolls had the same keywords as the Empire War Scrolls, I started buying up Bretonnian troops immediately. I had zero.
Right. I meant more within the match play system itself for the past year.
Right. And, I think Tomb Kings having a really powerful presence on the tournament circuit, I think, had something to do with that.
Yeah.
It's sad that they did that to Bretonnia too. It's like, after all of these years, Bretonnia finally got a new book after a decade of being abandoned on the side of the road. They get a new book, and it's actually pretty good, and Bretonnians are actually pretty competitive. Oh, wait.
Yep. Not anymore. But anyways, with Death, we had this very large, this mixture, right? The entire GA felt like you had to play it together to be truly competitive. Again, outside of Flesh of Your Courts or out of a pure Tomb King's army. You had to mix all these little sub-factions that were incredibly wonderful and therefore were very easy to counter if your opponent had any real tactical insight and had even bothered a cursory study of the War Scrolls. And so, unfortunately, we saw a furtherance of that by completely removing the Tomb Kings from really being allyable in any way, and these sub-factions kind of being more entrenched by GW, where they play better by themselves, and a removal of a lot of the things that made the Death Grand Alliance work together. With the new, it's not true of only Death; it's really true of all the Grand Alliances with how they've weakened the battle traits and the command traits and the artifacts for the larger groupings, and really stepped up these smaller sub-factions' abilities to really de-incentivize you to play the larger units. That initially, a lot of Death players rubbed a sore spot because we're like, great, we're getting kicked in the stomach again while we're down. Like, just shoot us and end it. Like, it's not worth continuing it. But once I read this book completely, and once I had time to really start imagining lists and figuring out, okay, well, what can I do with these sub-factions? Because I still love Age of Sigmar. I'm not ready to give up on it yet, even though, I feel like GW's given up on my army, at least initially. And Soulblight's what I've always loved the most about Death. Vlad von Karstein is why I play Death within Age of Sigmar. I actually bought a Seraphon army at the very beginning and had intended to play them. Fell in love with the story of Vlad from the end times, fell in love with the model, bought it, painted it. Probably top 2 or 3 best models that I've ever painted, period. And that was 2 years ago. So whenever I started looking through Soulblight in here, I was like, okay, this is the army I want to try. And that's whenever I started noticing the synergies that did things that Death didn't really do before. And that began to get me excited and think, okay, all these Death players who are moaning, you're right. And it's appropriate that they're moaning, like the zombies that they bring to the battlefield. But you've got to flip everything on its head like some of these other factions and think about this completely differently. So, Death used to be this very slow-moving army that would just overwhelm you with numbers, grab a point, and never concede it because you had the ability to put multiple saves on all these guys, like even your zombies that didn't have an armor save. You could get the Deathless Minions ability. Then you could throw on a White King with swords, Totem ability, which was another. Anytime a model within Death, any model would die, their final wound, you roll a die on a 6-up, the wounded or mortal wound is ignored. So you could do, 2 or 3 levels of saves pretty easily. And there were other abilities here and there that you could throw on them to kind of kind of boost your regular troops even more. But Soul Blight is not that. Soul Blight is an elite army that with these new abilities, they still have the kind of deathless minions. They have deathless thralls, which is everyone with Soul Blight keyword basically gets the new reduced 6-inch range deathless minions on a 6-up. Okay, cool. The Grand Alliance gets that. But you also get the Bloodlines, which is where this begins to get particularly interesting. So you have 4 different choices. You've got Dragon Warriors, which lets you re-roll hit rolls of 1 if you charged with that unit in a turn. Not bad, not incredible. Most of the Soul Blight units have pretty good to hit numbers, so it is useful. But re-rolling 1s is not an amazing ability, especially not when it's only on the charge. Then you have Lords of the Night, which is one that I like. It's clearly got application. You basically get the Deathless Minions ability on your entire army, regardless of whether or not they're within range of a hero. So that's a good ability because you basically get that second save all the time. It removes a lot of the importance of your heroes from the game, which which was, like with the Free Peoples, was a true linchpin of the force. You knock out the heroes, especially the general, and the rest of the army really suffers. And it still will to some degree, but that lessens it. Necromantic, which is my second favorite one. I do see myself running this from time to time. You get to add one of the casting and unbinding rolls for your wizards within your army, but that's not why I like this one. In addition, subtract 1 from the bravery of enemy units that are within 6 inches of 1 or more models from your army that have this ability. I'm like, well, that's cool because, we're starting to see more of an uptick in the abilities that Death has that subtracts from your opponent's bravery, which is a really nice, a really nice kind of companion ability to things like the Terrorgeists and the Banshees and all these other units that scream and inflict mortal wounds, because all these are testing against your opponent's bravery. So ways to chip away at your opponent's bravery and do that are a really nice synergy. So I can definitely see myself running that from time to time and kind of experimenting with that bravery reduction mechanic. In addition, it's just going to help you whenever you slam into an enemy, inflict casualties, and then they just have guys run away even more easily. But the winner in my book is Swift Death. You get a plus 2-inch movement to your entire army that has the Soul Blight keyword, and the entire army now flies. Most units in the army already did fly, so this really is just Blood Knights that are gaining the ability, and then a Vampire Lord if they're on a horse or on foot, and you didn't give them the Winged Terror or whatever it is, which you might as well have done that because it was free. So really, it's your Blood Knights gaining this. But now your entire army flies, which is really, really good, and they're 2 inches faster, which is even better because you're already a very fast army. Your slowest unit before this was the Blood Knights, moving at 10-inch speed. Everybody else was 12 or better. So you're flying across the battlefield, which is great. Like, clearly you're going to get to objectives faster. Clearly you're going to get into close combat faster, which this army wants to do because they don't have shooting. But the most important thing about this is you're negating your opponent's ability to shoot you before you get into combat. That's always been the weakness of Death. It's a underwhelming amount of shooting within your own army, especially when you're facing an army like Kharadron Overlords, or you're facing the Free Peoples, for example. Now, you can turn 1, turn 2, whatever it is, super early in the game, get in your opponent's face, start smashing them with superior units because your units are all elite. So you're going to be stronger than them for the most part. And that's what you want to do as fast as possible. So Swift Death is the way to go. And then we've got command traits, which, like most of the other armies, there are a couple that are okay, but there's one in particular that is somewhat negated by Swift Death if you put it on the on certain heroes because it gives the flying ability again. But who cares that that's redundant, because the rest of this command ability is what's truly beautiful. Your hero, your general, now basically has the hit and run ability. You were in combat, you can retreat out of it as if you could fly, if you normally couldn't, up to is it up to 12 inches away? No, it's just they can retreat and move as they fly, and then they get to charge again. So you don't like the combat you're in, your opponent's got something there that's particularly good against whatever general you have. Maybe your general is near death, run away, charge into a much weaker combat where you can kill something. You're all vampires, you regain health by killing stuff, heal yourself back up. If they keep chasing you, keep retreating and charging into combats that are better for you. And you can do that every single turn. That's a pretty good ability, especially considering you're getting a plus 2-inch movement buff.
So what are you looking at for like what the core of your list is going to be looking like if you're running Soul Blight?
Well, you're going to be outnumbered in almost every game, unless you're bringing in allies, which will probably be mandatory for most of the scenarios. So, my base core that I'm going to be running in a 2,000 point game is probably going to be a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, because first off, I love the model, and secondly, with some of these new kind of sub faction abilities within Soul Blight, it's kind of given that model what I do think it needs to be a bit more worth the 440 points that you're paying for it. Especially, whenever you start having that hit and fade ability with a model as powerful as that, there's certain synergies within the faction that I'll go into a little bit more later in terms of like certain units that I'll bring together. But bringing a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon and then bringing 2 units of Blood Knights, because they're so powerful, but 260 points for a battle line is really a steep price to pay. So for the third battle line choice in a 2,000 point game, I would bring Vargeist, because they're not terrible. They have the ability to chain extra attacks if they've inflicted casualties, and they can fly as well. They're fast. They don't regenerate in the same way that the Blood Knights can. But when you're saving 100 points that you can either put aside for summoning or allies, because that's a particularly good thing about Death now, that we have these kind of hard ally caps and these kind of even more narrow armies that are being brought, you can summon in without that breaking allegiance or counting toward your allies.
Yeah, suddenly summoning just got better.
Yes, without any rules for summoning changing. Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, not that that the rules for summoning didn't change. It's that there were new rules that summoning is kind of like a loophole to the allegiance rules.
Right. It's a second order of consequences based upon these other rules. Yes.
Yeah, and that is a really interesting possibility. Do you think you're going to be taking advantage of that a lot?
Yeah, my average list will probably not be bringing much in the way of allies. Like, it depends on what kind of event I'm going to, right? If I'm going to a tournament and I know I'm going to be playing 5 or 6 different games and I'm going to need a horde of units, then yes, absolutely, I'll bring allies, and it'll be death rattle almost every time, because the way that they've done the whole skeleton thing, where if you max out their unit at 40, which is what I would always bring anyways, then you're at a nice 280 points, because a White King, which buffs them to the next tier up beautifully, is exactly 120. You have your nice 400 point package right there ready to go. You're rocking 4 attacks each. That's 160 attacks from just them. Your Vampire Lords have abilities that, spells and command abilities that affect general death. It just says if they have the death keyword. So, for example, if you have a Vampire Lord, just the standard one, whether you put him on horse or wings or just on foot, he gets to add +1 attack to a death unit of your choice. So suddenly, you have more options to buff them within that. And that White King, of course, provides your entire army now with their final wound, a basically additional 6 of ward save if they're within range of his totem. So they synergize well. They bring a horde unit to an army that otherwise doesn't have it. But if I'm not going to a tournament, I'm probably not saving many points for I'm probably not spending anything on allies, and I'm probably going to save about the 400 points that allies would have for summoning, because then I can bring in whatever I need, right? If it ends up being one scenario and I need a horde of units, then I can just summon on zombies with 2 or 3 spellcasters incredibly easily and just merge the unit up into a 20, 30, 40 man squad, and problem is solved. Do I need something bigger because my opponent's running more monsters and maybe my Blood Knights aren't quite capable of taking care of that? Well, okay, I'll just summon in a Terrorgeist, or I'll summon in another Zombie Dragon without a Vampire on it, and problem is solved, because those got point reductions down to 300.
Nice.
So Death has a lot of versatility to really respond now because of the summoning. Like, summoning is truly, because of these new allies rules and all, Death has more of a versatility option than I would say other factions do have. So that's a bit of a buff for us.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I had been thinking about once I, had heard that your summoning pool doesn't break your allegiance up. I'm like, wow, that suddenly makes some real possibilities for Death being really powerful.
It does, but it also means that depending on what you're wanting to bring to the table via that, you're going to have to make a very careful choice between, do I bring that as an ally or do I leave that in my summoning pool? Because zombies are the only unit that Death has, and the only unit I know of in the game that can merge squads. So if you're going to be playing at a tournament and you know that you're going to have these scenarios where you have to have 20, 30 plus man squads to even control a point, against your opponent, then you're going to want to obviously be able to summon that. But let's say, that's not necessarily going to be feasible for you in the time that the scenario takes. Like, that you don't have enough time, you don't have enough spellcasters to summon in 30, 40 zombies, then you're going to have to use your ally point to bring those guys in, which is, again, a double-edged sword because now you're adding additional drops to an already drop-heavy army. So the question becomes, do you always just want to automatically give up first turn, or do you want to maybe fight for it with Soul Blight or with Soul Blight, because that's an option because you are such an elite army. So against armies that aren't necessarily running one battalion, maybe they got 5, 6, 7 drops, which we're going to see a little bit more of now, I think, that you have a potential of actually outdropping them with Soul Blight and leaving a summoning pool.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
That's going to get faster if you play Soul Blight. Night Haunt is super fast too because they can deep strike, but I don't think Night Haunt is quite there with their 4 units and a Mourngul to truly be competitive yet in any kind of scene, because they don't have a single unit that can truly mass into horde numbers, and they don't have a hero that's powerful. Their heroes are 60 and 80 points respectively. Their Spirit Hosts are not particularly impressive. They're quite slow. Their only truly quick unit once they're on the battlefield is Hex Wraiths, and they're a nice kind of mid-level unit, but they're not a true elite. So they're really an army that I don't feel like has enough of a identity or has enough options of gameplay yet to necessarily be a truly powerful one. So I think that most of what you're going to be seeing is Soul Blight for Death.
Yeah, and I'm sure Flesh Eating Courts are going to get plenty of love as well because they're like the new hotness.
Yep, their abilities are good as well. I glanced at them. I hate the models for them, honestly. That's why I don't really dip my toes into them beyond just the Terrorgeist and the Zombie Dragon, which brings up a question that GW really does need to address again. Whenever the first General's Handbook came out, we had this interesting instance where we had a few different units that had the same name but different war scrolls. And we have another instance of that with the app right now. So for Death, we have the Beast from the Grave version of Terrorgeist and Zombie Dragons, and we have the Flesh Eater Court version of the same thing. And their war scrolls are actually different. Now their abilities are almost all the exact same. It's just slight variations. So like the standard Terrorgeist, I haven't checked his war scroll since this most recent update, but his used to be you roll 3 dice and you compare that against your opponent's bravery, and the difference is how many mortal wounds you inflicted. And then they changed it with the, or I'm sorry, it was 2 dice, not 3 dice, 2 dice. And then the Flesh Eater Courts one was like, you start with a 6 automatically, basically for one of the 2 dice, and you roll a single other die, and you compare that against their bravery, and inflict mortal wounds as that. And the thing is that both are still there in the app. Like, I deleted their war scrolls and re-downloaded them just to see if they're still there, and they are. But we only have points listed within the Flesh Eater Courts section in this handbook. So my question is that still a playable unit? And if it is, then I would ask the same question of another unit I wanted to talk about in terms of synergy for the Soul Blight, and that is the Vampire Lord on Abyssal Terror. Now, unfortunately, he got a points increase to 300, so he's pretty hefty. And he's within the Compendium armies. Like we've seen his war scroll put out in the Vampire Counts one. So he has no keywords within that to synergize whatsoever with the rest of Death. But within the Soul Blight section on the app, so this is not within the General's Handbook, it's not on the War Scroll Builder website, but if you look at the app and you delete his war scroll and you re-download him within the Soul Blight section to make sure it's the most updated one, he's still there as well with his old war scroll that still has the Soul Blight keyword. So my question again to GW would be, is this playable? Like, are you going to fix this anytime soon and deny us of this extra unit? Or is this an oversight that you're just going to let run for a while? Because if you are playing Death and you're playing Soul Blight, bring him in an army with a zombie dragon, vampire lord and zombie dragon, because it's 740 points. It's a lot of points in an already elite army. So yes, you're cutting down your ability even more to field any kind of numerical army. But the ability to alpha strike, cannonball shot that zombie dragon 32 inches across the board turn 1 is too good to pass up on. At least while it's still available, because his spell says target a nearby, I believe it's death unit. That unit doubles its movement for the turn. That's it. It's not that it can't charge or anything else. It's so your zombie dragon, which now is a 16-inch move because you've taken the bloodline that gives you the plus 2-inch move, is now going to fly 32 inches turn 1, smack whatever the heck it wants to smack. And then if it's your general and you've taken the misform, it can just retreat out of combat if it needs to. The rest of your army is not far behind because they're all so fast anyways. And you can potentially, win the game turn 1, even though you have mopping up to do afterward.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts. As someone that's not playing Death, I really hope that gets relegated to the compendium and you are not allowed to do that, because that is just not nice, sir.
I want my own creative version of artillery to still be within the faction, please.
Yeah.
But another thing is that, Soulblight doesn't have a lot of units. So what we have to do as a Soulblight player is, look at what we have and, what are our options and what can we really do with these things? Because otherwise, again, we fall into that being hyper one-dimensional, easily counterable army. Because even with flying Blood Knights, you can still get bogged down by an enemy horde. They can crush you with just weight of numbers in a single turn, and Vargeists are not going to be the solution to that. Because you bring 5 Blood Knights for 260, you bring 3 Vargeists for 160. So your total amount of wounds is less. Your save is not quite as good. Your offensive power is not quite as good. You don't heal in the same way. Like Vargeists are, I would say, especially because of the faction ability that gives Blood Knights the ability to fly, are categorically worse than Blood Knights, and that shows in their 100 points less. But I'm just saying that I don't think that they have anything that's particularly better other than they're cheaper. But with that 100 points that you save, is there anything we can do with that? And the answer is yes. I don't particularly like bat swarms, but they're an option if you're going to be running up against shooting armies that may have a way to finagle you to where you can't quite get into combat with the shooting units that you want to, so you can still kind of bring that negative modifier to the battlefield. But fell bats are a real option, and I think that there's something that we're going to start seeing a lot of with the Soul Blight, because they're 80 points for 3 models. They're not amazing. I will never make that claim. But what they are is they are a 3 attack per model unit that whenever they're near something, so within 6 inches of a model that dies, they don't have to kill it. Something else could. So fly them up there with their now buffed to 16-inch speed. Fly them up there, charge them up near your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. You've just cannonballed across the battlefield, whether it's with or without that unique spell, because it's still going to be really, really fast. And if you take the icon, or you take the artifact that I would recommend, which is the Sanguine Banner, which is going to allow you to reroll one unit's charge that has the keyword vampire each turn, and that's within 12 inches of the model that has it. So that's a pretty good ability. With all these other kind of speed modifying, get this army even faster, get them in the opponent's face, kind of synergy that you're building. Well, these fell bats, once they get that buff and they jump to 6 attacks each. So for 80 points, you're getting 3 models that I believe have 3 or 4 wounds each, so not a ton. Their saves aren't great, but that's 18 attacks they're putting out, which is not bad. And then if you start bringing more of these guys, because you can bring them in up to 12 in a unit, which again is still points wise is about the same as you're paying for the Blood Knights, then you can fly them ahead of your Blood Knights because they're still faster, and you don't have to slow down your Blood Knights to do this. Run into that unit of massed infantry or whatever, wear them down a bit, and then have the Blood Knights come in behind them and smash them and finish them off. They're a nice kind of, as Vince called them in our show, like a bat bomb that you can throw ahead of your more elite units. Let them die. You don't care. And weaken things so that your heavier stuff, when it comes in there, it smashes them and keeps going. And that's going to be the important role I think they're going to play in an army that's numerically small, but they're going to help kind of bolster those numbers and be a bit of a meat shield.
Yeah, I think a really important thing that, to always keep in mind is when you're looking at a unit, like look at what it does, look at its points cost, and understand what role does this unit actually play in my army, and is it actually, even if it's not like earth-shattering, outstanding, crazy good, is this good for what I am paying for it? That's like that seems to be super key. And if you're paying 80 points for a 3 model unit that's like 4 wounds each, can fly 16 inches, and has the ability to like double its attacks, and they're 3 attacks each. Even if they're like hitting on like 4 up, 4 up.
That's what
Like,
they are, actually.
yeah, like that's pretty solid at 80 points. Like that, and it can fly.
And it's so fast. Like, that's the big thing, is like you can send this out ahead without negating the strength of the rest of the units in your army with all these buffs that you've applied. I mean, these guys are literally going to be crossing if you're starting 12 inches up, all of a sudden you're 28 inches across the battlefield without even charging, because these guys are just ridiculously fast. There's not going to be anything that can hide from them, too. That's going to be another big thing, is like your big heavy units need to go punch something, and maybe some weak hero is hiding in the corner. Well, these guys are going to be perfect for killing heroes, because again, they're suicide units. You don't care if they die. They're not the big important things that you actually have to focus on keeping alive.
Yep. That's
They're going to provide chaff within your army, because really the rest of death doesn't have this, especially if you're allying them in. They're going to provide chaff that's going to be quick enough to keep up with your army. Because this is again part of why I'm not really keen on bringing allies with Soul Blight, even though you have the option. And clearly things like a Death Rattle, Skeleton Horde fit nicely with them, because of the sense that this is a 40-man unit that does a lot of things that you want for some of these scenarios, but they're so slow. They're a 4-inch move. Yeah, you can run them, and there's a particular battalion you can bring that makes them a little bit faster, but I'm not sure that's going to be doable within the 400 points you have for allies. And summoning helps that a little bit, because you can summon things forward up to 18 inches, so you help negate the fact that they're so much slower. But this is an actual chaff unit that keeps up with your army. And the big thing is you have got to use the speed of this army to negate what strengths your opponent would have over you.
right.
And that's the big key with this new Soul Blight army that we see.
Yeah, this seems really interesting, and that definitely seems like the kind of direction that I could see Death going in. I think that's going to be the big thing with that and Flesh Eater Courts, and then, you're going to get the odd person here and there that's going to basically throw an army on the table that's like Nagash and was it Morghasts are the thing that go along with them for battle line, and
Yep.
just spam summoning with the rest of your points pool.
And you'll see an occasional Night Haunt player. I think Night Haunt could be particularly good at a 1,000 point game, because their units are all really cheap, other than of course, the giant, ugly Morngul. Their most expensive unit is Hex Rates at 160 for 5. Everything else is under 100. So, in a 1,000 point game, I could see that army doing well. But it's anything above like 1,500. It's where I think that army starts to really show its limitations. So, as most events and most tournaments that I've seen are 2,000 or above, that's why I think that Soul Blight's going to become the natural choice.
Yeah, definitely. All right, man. I think we have done Death to Death. We have done Free People to Death. We're going to have to bring some other guests on that have some expertise in particular factions to talk about where things are going in their faction as well, to get more eyes on this. We've got a lot of grist for the mill of Tactica Tuesday now, with all of this coming out, and everything about General's Handbook 2017 being all about tactics. So hopefully we can find the time on a fairly regular basis to be doing this, and keep churning it out, and get some good discussion going on about strategy and tactics out in the new Age of Sigmar.
Yep, especially while it's fresh, especially while it's fertile ground that hasn't necessarily been established within a meta, because that's what I always like to do. I always like to look at the new updates. That's why every kind of game, like even a card game like a Hearthstone or a Magic, I find particularly compelling, because you have the meta shift so rapidly with the releases. So every time we have a new big release like this with Age of Sigmar, it's like, hey, it's a golden age again for me, because now I get to sit down and look at, okay, what are the strategies that look like they'll work particularly well, and let's try to figure out what's going to happen in the meta and kind of beat that curve, so that we're always staying one step ahead, and that and my goal is that with the show, this is why I do it, is to help the viewer of the show kind of stay one step ahead and to do better in their Age of Sigmar games, because let's face it, we all like to win. Like, we can have fun playing the game even if we don't win, but we all want to win. And that's ultimately the motivation for doing the show, is so that myself and hopefully you, Paul, and all of our viewers can kind of get that extra leg up by taking a deep dive into the mechanics and the tactics that we can see evolving as the game evolves before necessarily the general consensus reaches that point.
Yeah, I think we have a really interesting period of time coming up right now, because all of these armies just got turned upside down, and a lot of them are going to be doing things that they weren't doing before, and everybody kind of has to relearn their force. And, even the ones that have, the battle tomes that were released in the past year that have allegiance abilities in them, just points changes and changes in the metagame are going to have a huge impact on those. I know even just like the Corn book just came out a few months ago, and there's point changes from the Corn book. And I'm going to have to completely reevaluate my Corn army, which I really have barely even started looking at yet. But just as an example, like the Skull Reapers were like the backbone of the force that I was using before, because they were really super cheap at 140, and now they went to 180, and that changes the math a lot. And for some unknown reason, Korgoraths got their scroll improved with the last Corn book, and they got their points dropped down to 80 with the General's Handbook 2017.
Yep. I'm happy. I like Korgoraths. I like seeing them on the table against me. They're a interesting challenge to face every time.
Yep, definitely. I've got 3. I think I want to get a 4th one. There is I think it's the Skull Take Battalion that lets you take 2 units of Korgoraths, and they get +3 attacks per model. And you can run Korgoraths in units of like up to 6 or something stupid like that.
5 or 6, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so I'm like I want to run like units of Korgoraths and have them hang out with my Skull Reapers and just go take some heads. That seems like that would be a really fun way to play this.
I agree.
All right, sir. You have anything else for us this evening?
I don't. Just like you said, we're going to make an effort to try to stay up to date and get more of these Tactica Tuesdays out again, with the Age of Sigmar General's Handbook 2.0 being released. Kind of stay on the cutting edge as much as we can of what tactics are coming out. But if you have nothing else, Paul, then I'm going to wrap it up here and say thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this one. I know we started later than we'd intended to, and thank you for sticking out with us. I know we had a long hiatus. Technology and life honestly got in the way, and I will have touch and go moments in the not too distant future, where there'll probably be a few weeks here and there when I have to miss doing Tactica Tuesdays, but we're going to do our best to stay back at it, to stay consistent, and so stay tuned for that. But until next time, this is James and Paul.
Yes,
happy gaming.